In this program, we are going to explore the morphology of the sign of Libra. We use the term morphology to mean the study of the shape of a form in relation to its function, and Libra typifies this relationship. By seeing how beautifully the glyph of Libra reflects morphologically those factors ruled by this sign, you will gain invaluable insights as to how morphology manifests through all 12 signs of the zodiac. Libra rules parallel lines. 2 parallel lines are the simplest illustration of this. In fact, the glyph of Libra derives from this parallel. The top parallel is crimped, making it raised and elongated. This is the accepted symbol of the sign of Libra. It embraces the whole morphology of Libra, the sign of the balance or scales, as we can see here. Let us now take this idea further and see how the crimped top manifests in architecture. The archway of the Romans is our first example of this morphology of Libra. Here, the Arch of Constantine is seen, an arch of triumph. The Arc de Triomphe, commemorating Napoleon's victories, was meant to become the capstone around which modern Paris was to be constructed. We are also familiar with the extended arches of ancient aqueducts, which the Romans built to bring water down from the hills into their towns and cities. The Romans also used arches in their viaducts, which brought the traffic of foot-worn travelers, wagons, and even chariots the shortest distance into Rome. These were the forerunners of our modern freeways that bear such incredible loads of traffic between cities. Libra thus rules arches, freeways, their traffic and their bridges, which often depict morphologically the Libra glyph. But we have not yet finished with Libran lines. Libra rules the straight line, and therefore the shortest distance between 2 points. The line is illustrative of a single dimension, or if you like, a point taken to infinity. But parallel lines may be extended laterally indefinitely to produce a 2-dimensional morphology, which is the plane in its simplest expression. It is the flat surface of a plane that is also ruled by Libra. The flat surface of a table, especially flat on a billiard table, a football field, a mountain top or plateau, as in Cape Town's famous Table Mountain, a specialized surface like the landing deck of an aircraft carrier. Thus, flat-surfaced terrains like Norfolk and Bedfordshire in England. The whole state of Holland is almost flat. Add to this that Libra is an air sign, and the fact that Holland is most often windy, evidenced by the rotating sails of her giant windmills, which pump water from her flat areas back into the sea. And you have excellent examples here of Libran morphology. The morphology of flatness leads us into consideration of flat objects like paper, paper which lies flat, but may be used in many features of everyday life. Flat paper may be used as wrapping, and Libra rules the wrapping of all articles, especially in craft paper. But flat paper must be stacked, and stacked paper must be baled for storage or packed in reams for printing. Libra rules layering and stacking, wrapping and containing. Libra therefore rules the wrapping industry. Flat surfaces are often glued together or laminated for strengthening and surfacing. Sometimes the layers are separated by paper, which has been corrugated to give support to packing. Such laminated and corrugated containers and the packing of them come under Libra. The stacking of printed paper suggests the content of the simple book, a stack of flat sheets of printed paper bound on one side. When the book is opened and laid flat, it presents with a crimp, which is its spine, again so characteristic of the zodiacal sign Libra, from which we derive our modern words, library and librarian. Libra therefore rules books, but not the reading of them or the learning from them. Libra also rules stacks and shelving, which basically is a stack of flat surfaces. Books on shelves are doubly Libran. In the human body, several important life-maintaining structures are ruled by Libra on a morphological basis. Two of these are organs of excretion. The first is the skin, which is related to Libra through its enormous flat surface. It occupies between 2 to 3 square meters and is really the largest organ in the body. The skin contains many organelles, especially the sweat glands, which in hot and even mild weather cool the body with an excretion of sweat to maintain it at an even temperature, about 98.6 Fahrenheit, or 37 degrees centigrade. The kidneys are the other main organs that keep the body systems in balance, and thus also maintain that sameness of physiological function of systems which we call homeostasis. The kidneys balance acid and alkaline, help to keep the level of sugar in the blood constant, hold back or excrete salt, and maintain water balance. These are powerful astrological reasons for assigning these organs and the process of homeostasis to the sign of Libra, the scales. We should not overlook the fact that man can be spiritually orientated, and that at a level higher than mere bodily awareness, he can also maintain spiritual homeostasis. Whilst on the subject of Libran anatomy, see how the head and shoulders make a Libran glyph. This same morphology is also seen in the external ear. The layered structure of Libra must also be applied to Libran architecture. An apartment block of many stories is like a stack of books. Each layer of apartments follows on the other, all the same. The end result, perhaps a tower block, is so characteristic of the British Midlands, where high-rise flats abound. The surfaces and layers of Libra suggest the application of layers to objects. For example, applying a layer as a paint or spray to a surface we call decorating, which gives not only a new and attractive look, but also protects the material or surface on which it is laid. The morphology of the Libran glyph suggests a bird in flight with wings widespread. Libra in the house of Scorpio, the 8th, is the aspect for the eagle and the falcon. The eagle is a common symbol used in aggressive nations like Germany, the USA, and Russia, which is why it draws in qualities of Scorpio. Gerard Manley Hopkins, the poet, gives us a wonderful description of the falcon. I caught this morning morning's minion, kingdom of daylight's dauphin, dapple dawn-drawn falcon. In his riding of the rolling level underneath him steady air, and striding high there, how he rung upon the rein of a wimpling wing in his ecstasy. Then off forth on swing, as a skate's heels sweep smooth on a bow bend. The hurl and gliding rebuffed the big wind. My heart in hiding stirred for a bird, the achieve of, the mastery of the thing. This suggests the epitome of balance in the testing conditions of a gale. Contrasting these birds is, of course, the dove. The dove is the symbol of peace, and Librans are peacemakers. Libra rules alliances, and history is littered with them. The Grand Alliance between Russia, England, and Prussia was the one which defeated Napoleon. Russia was sometimes a despondent ally, but brought about his retreat from Moscow. The victory of the Allies in World War II, achieved by the Big Three, was also contributed to by an ever-increasing string of previously defeated allies led by Britain. Peace after World War II brought about the United Nations organization, a partnership for peace, surely under the rulership of Libra. The telephone is ruled by Libra. The morphology of the phone has altered considerably, even in the single century of its existence. Telephone companies have become rich and powerful, and telephonic forms of communication are the most commonly found methods for people to talk to each other at a distance. Libra in the 3rd house is a short distance or local call. Libra in the 9th house is a long distance call, often overseas.
What's it like over there in sunny San Diego?
It's wonderful. We're having desert winds.
Morphologically, Libra rules the bell. The shape of the bell gives us the Libra glyph. The bell is a communication device, and Libra, as an air sign, communicates through the tolling of the bell knocker, or tongue. Libra in the 1st is the front doorbell. Libra in the 7th house is marriage, wedding bells on invites, and the ceremony itself. We have seen that Libra rules packaging, and it is not difficult to see that it must also rule luggage. The case with its raised handle is a perfect example of the Libra morphology. Libra rules the shirt and the smock, in the garment of both sexes. jerseys, sweaters, pullovers, robes, suits, and so on. Let's now look at some of the Libran occupations. Policeman, judge and barrister, lawyer and solicitor, diplomats, public relations officers, locksmiths, security guards, computer operators and programmers, taxi drivers, chauffeurs, racing drivers, railway engineers, car manufacturers, packers, airport baggage staff, aeroplane pilots, librarians, telephonists, and painters and decorators. In music we have pianists, violinists, and guitarists. More than any other activity, Libra rules partnerships. In daily life, we can't go very far without calling upon one of our many partnerships with life. Within the family, of course, these partnerships blend into relationships. The marital relationship is the first we think of. Courting the loved one, being affianced to the loved one, marrying the loved one after a period of premarital petting. The developing phases of this courtship, overt or clandestine, may be spread over 3 houses related to Libra, and both adjacent to the 7th house, which is Libra's natural dwelling. In the house proximal and adjacent to Libra, that is, the 6th house, the couple are unmarried and enter the usual engagement period. This is the house of the Virgin, who likes a white wedding to prove it. Before marriage, however, it is sometimes recommended for the couple to have intercourse, in case they are not sexually compatible, and premarital intercourse may occur. This usually brings in a feature of the 8th house, the natural home of Scorpio, the sign of sexuality and physical testing and climax. The marriage makes the relationship legal and binding, with all kinds of implications, prenuptial contracts which guard the individual wealth of each partner. Libra rules contracts, is involved where there are divorce proceedings and alimony to be arranged, decrees nisi, division of property, and all the legalese and paraphernalia of divorce action must come under the legal hegemony of Libra. Libra and the law are concerned when entering into business partnerships, limited liability companies, and proprietaries. Public company shareholding and, in fact, the holding of any type of share is related to Libra, its ruler Uranus, or their house, the 7th. But the special relationship we share with our daily existence may also fall under Libra, which rules that valuable associate of most of us, which we call the car or automobile. The car is almost universally used on the planet as the most convenient form of transport, getting one from point A to point B. In the USA, many laned freeways transport people quickly and cheaply from a city's far-flung suburbs to their business places, sometimes a journey of 60 miles or more. Los Angeles and New York City are super examples of modern transportation. Even still, men and women there must spend many hours with their partner, the motor car. This is true also of London and the environs of Manchester and Birmingham. United States cities average some 150 miles apart, and travel by car from city to city is still a lengthy affair, and comforts provided in the car like air conditioning, a Libra matter, and radio, another Libra matter, and fast acceleration are appreciated. The reliable automobile helps the busy person schedule his day based on strict timing. Libra thus rules timekeeping chronometers, watches, clocks, clock faces, appointments, any factor or objects that measure and account for time lapse come under Libra. The Greek letter omega is used as the logo of one famous and popular watch. In architecture, the dome of the Pantheon in Rome is suggestive of Libra, and possibly resulted in the construction of the immense dome of St. Peter's, a cathedral that took several hundred years to complete. The dome, repeated in St. Paul's Cathedral, London, has inspired the Capitol buildings of the main cities of the United States. Each state capital has its Capitol, and these are essentially Libran structures. In the layout of the cities of today, especially in the suburbs, we find many lay-bys with their shops, and indeed even shopping malls, which are essentially diversions of the main thoroughfare, street or freeway. They are frequently shaped like the Libra glyph. This is also true of cul-de-sacs that are also inlets of the main thoroughfare. Libra rules keys, especially those of ancient Rome, which have not changed their shape up to the present-day ones. And it also rules the locks in which the keys turn. Locking comes under the sign of Scorpio, but keys and locks are Libran. Locking up suggests a police force, and through the element of law, which is native to the sign of Libra, the police must necessarily enforce the law. Law, regulations, bylaws, authoritarian edicts are essentially Libran, and frequently issue forth from the complementary house, the first, to that of the Libran seventh. The first house is the house of government and state authority. Taking another look at cars, we note that police cars have established their own idiosyncratic identity and would come under Libra's own house, the seventh. We might now also trace the car through several of the 12 houses. The car in the third house is the school bus. The car in the fifth house is the Rolls Royce. The car in the sixth house is the ambulance. The car in the ninth house is a long car, the stretched limousine. The car in the 10th house is the car of the chief executive. The car of the 11th house is any multi-seated vehicle, the old char-a-banc, or today's intercity coach. The car of the 12th house is the hearse. Through the planet Uranus, which is the ruler of Libra, we have some strange connections with everyday objects and experiences. Uranus is the planet and Libra is the sign of gadgetry. Gadgets for the kitchen, gadgets for the office, and so on, and so on. With Sagittarius, Uranus rules computers and the programming work associated with them. It is also concerned with any feature of synchronization, coordination, and precision work. And it recalls for us the anatomical basis of coordination and balance in the human brain, which is the cerebellum, itself very Libran in its morphology. Uranus is featured in detail later in this course, along with its retrograde motion. Sufficient here to mention the eccentric nature of Uranus retrograde. Uranus retrograde rules the eccentric inventor, and he is often the inventor of gadgetry that brings him wealth and prestige through the patent office. One of the spiritual implications of the sign of Libra is, of course, the matter of the use of a police force, and whether it should implement the letter of the law or the spirit of the law, or a little of both. I have worded the last line deliberately to suggest that Libra is associated with the equivocal, and with equivocal observations rather than critical ones. Some would call this sitting on the fence. It is, of course, figuratively speaking. Libra rules fences, and sitting on the fence would be Uranus in the 5th house. But the Uranus would be retrograde for reasons we give later. Like all balances, the good behavior of a well-integrated personality should include the acceptance of the middle path. Librans are peacemakers. They walk in the middle of the road, neither to the right or to the left. They choose the middle way in treading the spiritual path too. They support equality in mankind, equality in rank, equality in race, and equality in sex. They would rather spend their time weighing up than coming to a hard and fast decision. They would wait for a good time before interceding. They like to let the law run its own course. Their indecisiveness makes them often ask, "Who am I to say?" It is not surprising that they are often non-committal. They also like to be the keeper of the keys in a household. They are in danger of becoming dilettantes, pecking at the surface of things, rather than going into anything in depth. Inevitably they are, because of this, extrovert, even-tempered, and gentle. They like things to be the same, and Libra is the sign of homosexuality, which suggests a preference for the same sex. We have almost finished this presentation, but before we close, let's sum up what we have learned about Libra.